The drive to Mr. Harrison's office took 20 minutes. I knew every traffic light, every turn, every pothole along the way. I had driven that route dozens of times, mostly to visit Grandpa Ray at the retirement home nearby. Today felt different. My hands gripped the steering wheel too tight. My breath came too shallow. I told myself it didn't matter. Whatever was in the will didn't change who I was or what I did every day. I worked as a social worker at Clover Bridge Community Shelter, helping women and children who had nowhere else to go. I didn't do it for money or praise. I did it because the work mattered. But sitting in my car outside that sleek brick building, in my sensible blazer and flat shoes, I knew exactly what was waiting inside. My mother, Diane, in her string of pearls, ready to judge every inch of me. My father, Stephen, arms crossed, already disappointed before I even opened my mouth. My brother Blake, in his tailored suit, smelling like success and arrogance. They would be sitting at a long table, looking like winners. And I would be Claire Whitfield, 30 years old, the family disappointment, taking her usual seat in the corner. I got out of the car anyway. Hello everyone, and thank you for being here. Before the story continues, take a second to tell me where you're watching from in the comments. Here we share true-to-life revenge stories where the ignored, humiliated, and betrayed rise quietly, and make it count. I truly enjoy seeing how far these stories travel and hearing from you directly. One important note: some elements in this story have been fictionalized for educational and storytelling purposes, and any resemblance to real people or settings is coincidental. That being said, the message I'm sharing is meaningful, and I hope it speaks to you. My name is Claire Whitfield, and according to my family, I made the worst decisions of my life before I turned 25. I chose social work over law school. I chose a studio apartment over a downtown condo. I chose helping strangers over climbing any corporate ladder. To the Whitfields, those were not values. They were failures dressed up in soft language. My father, Stephen, built a property management company from nothing. He was proud of that and made sure everyone knew it. My mother, Diane, taught tennis at a country club and spent the rest of her time hosting dinner parties and quietly comparing her children to everyone else's. Blake, my older brother, became a corporate attorney. He wore expensive shoes and spoke in a voice that always sounded like he was closing a deal. My parents treated him like a trophy they had polished for decades. Then there was me, the daughter who worked with homeless women, who drove a 10-year-old Subaru and lived in a neighborhood they refused to visit, who showed up at Christmas and talked about her clients instead of her salary. I had learned early that arguing with them was like arguing with weather. Never changed anything. So I stopped trying to fit into their picture of success. Built my own. Growing up, the gap between Blake and me was impossible to ignore. Blake won the science fair in 7th grade. My parents framed his ribbon and hung it in the hallway. I earned straight A's every single semester, and my mother's response was always the same. Well, yes, but what are you going to do with that? When Blake wrecked his car at 19, my father had a replacement in the driveway within 2 weeks. When I asked to borrow that same car for a college visit, Dad said I needed to plan better next time. Every birthday, every holiday, every casual dinner felt like a competition I had never signed up for. Blake's career updates were greeted with raised glasses and wide smiles. My updates about the families I was helping at the shelter were met with polite nods and quickly changed subjects. "Do they even pay you properly?" Mom would ask, cutting her steak. "It's not about the pay," I would say. And she would look at me like I had just announced I was moving to a different planet. Grandpa Ray was the only person who never made me feel strange for caring about people. He actually listened. He asked follow-up questions. He remembered the names of the families I had mentioned months before. He saw me. Really, truly saw me. Grandpa Ray's full name was Raymond Arthur Whitfield. He had built a small manufacturing business decades ago, sold it at the right time, and lived quietly ever since. He drove an old pickup truck until he could no longer drive and wore the same brown cardigan to almost every family dinner without apology. But he was sharp. Sharper than anyone gave him credit for. We had a tradition. Every first Sunday of the month, I would bring him coffee and 2 glazed donuts from the bakery on Maple Street. We would sit in his back garden and just talk. Not about money or status. About books, about the neighbors on his street, about what made a life worth living. He once told me, "Claire, most people spend their whole lives earning things that don't fill them up. You figured out what fills you up when you were still young. Don't let anyone talk you out of it." Kept those words close. On the hard days at work, when the shelter was overwhelmed or a family I had helped for months suddenly lost their housing, I would hear his voice and keep going. He passed away 4 months ago. Quietly in his sleep, exactly how he always said he hoped to go. I missed him every single day. Mr. Harrison's office smelled like old leather and lemon polish. A secretary with a calm smile led us into a wide conference room and arranged chairs around a long mahogany table. Mom was already seated when I arrived, positioned beside Blake, whose suit probably cost more than my monthly rent. Dad stood near the window with his hands in his pockets, looking out at the parking lot like he was already bored before any of it started. Uncle Pete, Grandpa Ray's younger brother, sat at the far end of the table. He was quiet and weathered, doing his best to disappear into the chair. The Whitfields mostly treated him like furniture at family gatherings. Mr. Harrison, gray-haired and unhurried, arranged his papers without rushing. "Thank you all for coming," he said. "Raymond Whitfield's last will and testament is clear and detailed. He left specific instructions for how today would proceed, and I intend to follow them exactly." Mom straightened. Blake rolled his shoulders back. Dad turned from the window. I sat down and folded my hands in my lap. I was not expecting much. That was not self-pity speaking. It was just honest. My family had always made it clear I was not in the running for anything they considered valuable. I kept my face neutral and waited. Mr. Harrison read through the opening formalities in a steady, measured voice. Legal language I only half followed. Then he moved to the specific bequests. "To my brother Peter Whitfield," he read, "I leave my pickup truck, my woodworking tools, and the hunting cabin in Vermont. He'll know what to do with them." Uncle Pete nodded once, slowly. He pressed his lips together like he was trying very hard not to cry. "To my daughter-in-law, Diane Whitfield, I leave the antique clock collection and the oil painting from the front hallway." Mom smiled and touched her pearls. She had always wanted that painting. She had mentioned it at least twice a year for the past decade. "To my son, Stephen Whitfield, I leave the 2 acres of land in Millbrook County and the certificates of deposit held at First National Bank." Dad sat up straighter. He nodded slowly, calculating, the way he always did when numbers entered the conversation. Everyone was receiving something reasonable, something fitting. I watched Blake from the corner of my eye. He sat perfectly still, but I could see the tension collecting in his jaw. He was waiting for his name. He was expecting something significant, something that matched the effort he believed he had put in. The room felt tighter. Everyone leaned just a little forward as Mr. Harrison turned the page. "To my grandson, Blake Whitfield," Mr. Harrison continued, "I leave my stock portfolio, currently valued at approximately $48,000, and the signed first edition book collection in storage at the house." Blake's expression did not change, but his eyes flickered. 48,000 was not nothing, and the books carried obvious sentimental weight. A small corner of his mouth lifted upward. He glanced at Mom, who gave him a brief, satisfied nod. Then Mr. Harrison paused. He turned to the next section. Everyone shifted slightly because they knew exactly what came next. My father looked at me then. Just for a moment. It was not a kind look. It was the look of a man who had already written someone off and was now waiting for official confirmation. Blake examined his fingernails. Mom adjusted her bracelet. Mr. Harrison cleared his throat softly and found the next line on the page. "And to my granddaughter, Claire Whitfield." The room went perfectly still. Even the hum of the air conditioning seemed to fade into the background. I kept my hands flat on my thighs, my spine straight, and my face completely calm. Something behind my sternum was pulling tight, like a rope being wound too hard. I breathed slowly through my nose. And I waited. To my granddaughter Claire Whitfield, Mr. Harrison said. I leave nothing. 2 words. Nothing. The silence lasted exactly 3 seconds. Then my mother laughed. It was not a polite, surprised laugh. It was the kind of laugh that fills a whole room and bounces off every wall. She pressed her fingers to her lips, but the sound kept coming. Her shoulders shook. Her eyes watered. Blake looked down at the table, but the smirk was right there on his face, barely hidden behind a thin layer of manners. Dad shook his head slowly, like a man watching a sports team he had always doubted finally prove him right. Oh, Claire, Mom said, catching her breath at last. Even at the end, Dad knew. Knew what? I wanted to ask, but I did not. He was a smart man, Blake said quietly, like he was being generous by not saying more than that. Mr. Harrison kept his face carefully blank. His secretary, standing near the window, suddenly found something very important to study on her notepad. The whole room pressed in on me at once. The leather chairs, the framed certificates, the afternoon light coming through the blinds at an angle. I kept my hands flat on my thighs. I kept my face completely still. I did not cry. I mean, it makes sense, Dad said, leaning back and folding his arms. Dad respected people who built real things. Blake built a career. You built what exactly? He let the question hang there without expecting an answer. She works in a shelter, Blake said, in a tone that made it sound like something a teenager did on a volunteer day. She plays social worker, Mom corrected, dabbing her eye. She said it the way someone says, plays pretend. I did not respond. Defending myself to them was like arguing with weather. Never changed anything. Just left you exhausted. So I sat still. I let them enjoy the moment they had been quietly waiting for without ever admitting it. But underneath my stillness, something sharp had woken up inside me. Not anger. Something more focused than anger. Because something did not add up. I knew Grandpa Ray. I knew how his mind worked. He was deliberate. Every word he chose, every decision he made, was chosen on purpose. Leaving me nothing, with no explanation. After years of Sunday mornings and honest conversations in his garden. That did not sound like him. Not at all. I watched Mr. Harrison while my family congratulated themselves. He had gathered his papers into a neat stack. His hands were steady. But there was something in his posture, a kind of careful patience that did not match the energy of a meeting wrapping up. He was not moving toward the door. He was not reaching for his briefcase. He was waiting for something. I had worked with enough people in hard situations to recognize when someone was holding something back. Not lying. Just waiting for the right moment. Then I remembered. The last time I visited Grandpa Ray, about 3 weeks before he passed, he had squeezed my hand at the door. He said something I had not fully understood. Claire, sometimes the best gift comes last. Don't walk out before the end. I had laughed, thinking he meant dessert at Sunday dinner. But sitting in that office now, with my mother's laughter still hanging in the air, I heard those words differently. Don't walk out before the end. My heart picked up speed. My palms felt warm. I looked directly at Mr. Harrison. He met my eyes for just a fraction of a second. And in that brief exchange I was absolutely certain. There was something else. Mr. Harrison, I said. My voice came out steady, which surprised even me. The room went quiet. Mom stopped mid-sentence. Blake looked up. Dad frowned. Is that everything? Yes. Mr. Harrison paused. It was brief, barely a breath. But I caught it the way you catch a small crack in a wall that tells you the whole structure underneath is shifting. That concludes the will, he said, carefully choosing each word. I nodded slowly. The will. But is that everything Grandpa Ray left for today's meeting? The pause that followed was longer. In that pause my mother made a small, confused sound. Blake tilted his head. Dad's frown deepened across his forehead. Mr. Harrison set his pen down on the table. There is, he said at last, one additional document. He said it quietly, professionally, like he had been rehearsing exactly that sentence for months. 'Cause he had. I was absolutely sure he had. Mom's smile disappeared so fast it looked like someone had wiped it clean off her face. Blake sat up straight. Dad's chair scraped the floor as he leaned sharply forward. Uncle Pete, at the far end of the table, raised his head. Mr. Harrison reached into his briefcase and removed a thick cream-colored envelope. My name was written on the front in Grandpa Ray's familiar handwriting. The envelope was heavier than I expected. Cream-colored, sealed with dark red wax. My name written across the front in that familiar slanted script I had seen on birthday cards since I was 5 years old. Claire and Whitfield. He always used my full name for important things. Raymond Whitfield left specific instructions, Mr. Harrison explained. His voice calm but deliberate. This letter is to be read aloud in this office, immediately following the reading of the will. It is only to be opened if Claire is present. Only if Claire is present, Mom repeated. Her voice had gone flat and very strange. Those were his instructions. Mr. Harrison nodded once, firmly. He was extremely specific. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Blake looked at me differently now. Not the usual dismissive glance. Something sharper. Something almost worried. Dad said nothing, which was somehow louder than anything he could have said out loud. I held the envelope in both hands. The wax seal pressed against my thumb. "Read it," Mom said. Her voice had an edge to it now, brittle as dried glass. "If it's meant to be heard, then read it aloud." I broke the seal slowly. It made a soft sound like something that had been locked for a long time finally coming open. My hands were completely steady. I unfolded 2 pages of paper. Typed, formal, signed at the bottom in blue ink. The signature was slightly uneven, like he had written it on a day when his hand was not cooperating. But it was unmistakably his. Cleared my throat. The room was so quiet I could hear the clock on the wall ticking between seconds. "To my beloved granddaughter Claire," I began. My voice was clear and even. "If you are reading this, then the will has been read. And you now know I left you nothing in it." Blake's jaw tightened. Kept going. "I imagine your mother laughed. Your father looked disappointed. Your brother felt satisfied. If I know my family, and I believe I do, that is exactly what happened." Mom's face went very still. Not calm. Still in the way a pond goes still just before something breaks the surface. Dad placed both hands flat on the table in front of him. Blake looked down at his lap. "I want you to know, Claire, I left you nothing in the will on purpose. I wanted to see how your family would behave when they believed you had lost everything. I needed you to see their true faces." Uncle Pete quietly folded his hands. He did not look surprised at all. The silence had taken on a different quality. Thicker. Heavier. Like the air before a storm. I continued reading. "People show you who they are when they think the stakes are gone. Your mother's laughter, your father's disappointment, your brother's satisfaction. Those are not accidents. Those are habits. Patterns that have been there your whole life. Appearing clearly now without the polite coatings people use at Christmas dinner." Mom made a small sound. Not words. Just a sharp intake of breath, like something had pressed down on her chest. Blake pushed back from the table slightly, creating distance. "I am not angry with them. I understand who they are. But I wanted you, Claire, to see them clearly too. Because you have spent 30 years softening their edges in your own mind. You have made excuses for them. You have absorbed every criticism and convinced yourself that perhaps someday they would see you the way I see you." My throat tightened. I paused for just a moment. "They will not," I read. "Not unless something forces them to look. So I arranged something to help." Mr. Harrison sat perfectly still across from me, waiting calmly for me to turn the page. I turned to the second page. The words were still typed and calm, but what they said changed everything in that room. 12 years ago, I established a private trust. It is completely separate from my estate and separate from everything mentioned in the will today. Over the years, I have added to it consistently. It holds my personal investment accounts, 2 commercial properties I purchased under a different business entity, and the proceeds from the quiet sale of my original business interests, which I conducted privately in 2015. I could feel Blake staring at me from across the table. I did not look up. That trust currently holds assets valued at approximately $2.8 million. Claire, that trust belongs entirely to you. The transfer documents are held by Mr. Harrison and have been ready for some time. The trust became active this morning. You are the sole beneficiary, the sole manager, and the sole decision-maker over every dollar within it. The room came apart. Not literally. But Blake shoved his chair back so hard it screeched against the floor. Mom gasped sharp and high. Dad slammed one open palm onto the mahogany table. That cannot be legal, Dad said, his voice shaking. 2.8 million. Blake, Mr. Harrison said firmly. Sit down. She has not finished reading. The silence that followed Mr. Harrison's instruction had real weight to it. Blake sat back down, face red along the edges. Dad stayed standing, both palms pressed to the table, breathing the way a man breathes when he is trying hard to hold himself together. Mom had gone completely pale. The color had drained from her face quickly and totally. I held the pages steady and kept my voice even. I know what is happening in that room right now. They are not upset because they love you, Claire. They are upset because they had already counted that money as theirs. They visited me. They called. They helped with the garden. And all of it, every bit of it, came with an unspoken price tag. Something cold and clear settled into my chest. Not surprise. Recognition. The feeling of seeing something you always suspected, finally confirmed. Blake visited weekly for the past 3 years. Your mother reminded him every single time. She kept a record, Claire, an actual written log of each visit and every favor. She mentioned it to me herself once, thinking it would impress me. Mom made a sound like the air had been knocked clean out of her. It did not impress me, I read. I could feel the heat coming off my mother across the table. I did not stop. Your father called me 4 times in the past 5 years. 3 of those calls were requests, for money or for business advice he intended to profit from. The 4th was to tell me Blake had made partner, not to ask how I was, to share news that reflected well on the family name. Dad's jaw was so tight I could see the muscle working in his cheek. They are not bad people. They are people who understand the world as a series of transactions. They give to receive. They love with conditions. They measure everything, including their children, by what those children produce. That is how they were built. I do not hate them for it. But I could not reward it with what I spent a lifetime building. Uncle Pete sat quietly at the far end of the table, pressing his fingers together, saying nothing. And then there is you. You came every first Sunday without fail. You brought coffee and donuts. You asked about my neighbors by name. When I told you the same story twice because my memory was slipping, you listened like it was the first time. My voice wavered, just slightly. Kept reading. You never asked me for a single thing, Claire. Not once in all the years we had Sunday mornings together. You asked about me. You listened. You laughed at my bad jokes. When I was sick last winter, you sat with me for 4 hours in that hospital waiting room without being asked and without making it feel like a sacrifice. I stopped for just a moment. I pressed my lips together and breathed through my nose. I would not cry. Not there. Not in front of them. I am giving you this wealth because you already understand what it is for. You know that money is a tool, not a destination. You know that a life spent helping people is not a failed life, no matter who tells you otherwise. Use this well. Finish what you planned. You told me 2 years ago about the resource center. A place where women could get job training, counseling, and emergency support all in one space. You said you needed funding and a building and time. Now you have all 3. Go build it. You are not a disappointment, Claire. You are the one who got it right. I love you, my girl. Don't apologize for a single choice you have made. All my love always, Grandpa Ray. I folded the letter, set it down, and finally looked up. The office had never been so completely quiet. Mom stared at the table. Blake had both hands pressed flat against his thighs, like he was trying to hold himself in place. Dad's face had gone the color of dark brick. Uncle Pete cleared his throat softly. That was the only sound for a long moment. Mr. Harrison spoke first. I have all the trust transfer documents prepared. Claire, if you will stay after, we can review everything and begin the process. For everyone else, this concludes today's meeting. Dad pushed his chair back hard. This is not legal. His judgment was compromised near the end. Mr. Whitfield, Mr. Harrison said calmly, your father was evaluated by 2 board-certified physicians 6 weeks before his passing. Both confirmed he was fully competent in every regard. He knew exactly what he was doing. We are contesting this, Blake said flatly, already thinking like the attorney he was. You are welcome to consult your own counsel, Mr. Harrison replied, equally flat. You will not find grounds. I stood up. My legs were steady. I'll stay, I told Mr. Harrison. Then I looked at my family. Not with anger. Not with satisfaction. Just clearly, the way you look at something you finally understand completely. I'll be in touch when I'm ready, I said. They did not leave quietly. Mom cried in the hallway, loud enough for Mr. Harrison's secretary to exchange an uncomfortable look with the wall. Blake and Dad argued in short, clipped sentences near the elevator about calling someone. A judge, a forensic accountant, anyone who could change the outcome. Dad came back to the doorway once. He looked at me like I was a stranger. After everything we gave you, he said. You gave me exactly what you chose to give me, I replied. And it was never quite enough to make me feel like I belonged. That is okay. I found belonging elsewhere. He left without another word. The door closed behind him. Then it was just me, Mr. Harrison, and the trust documents spread across the conference table. We spent 2 hours going through everything. The properties were in solid locations with reliable tenants. The investments were diversified and well managed. The cash reserve alone could cover years of modest living without touching anything else. At the very end, Mr. Harrison slid a small sealed card across the table. My name on the front in Grandpa Ray's handwriting. Inside was a photograph. The 2 of us in his garden, me laughing. Him watching me with that expression of quiet pride. On the back. Already rich. Now it's official. The calls started within 24 hours. Mom left 3 voicemails. The first was clipped and demanding. The second had crying in it, low and persistent. The third was quiet and exhausted, which was somehow the hardest to delete. Blake sent a formal letter through his firm, citing undue influence and mental competency questions. Mr. Harrison forwarded it with a brief note. Not a concern. I'll handle it. Dad sent a long email about family loyalty and how I was throwing away everything Grandpa Ray had stood for by refusing to share. I read each message. Then I turned my phone face down on the kitchen counter and made a cup of tea. The next morning the extended family calls began. People I had not spoken to in years suddenly had reasons to check in. A cousin named Tyler wanted coffee and a chance to catch up. Another cousin, Holly, sent a warm message about how she had always admired me and felt we had lost touch too long ago. Aunt Bev, my father's older sister, called to say the family was fracturing and that maybe, if I truly had a generous heart, I could do something healing for everyone. I let every single one of those calls go to voicemail. There was one call I did take. My closest friend, Megan. We had been friends since our first week of college. She was a physical therapist, down to earth and genuinely funny. She had never once made me feel strange for my choices. I trusted her the way you trust someone who has seen you ugly cry in a hospital parking lot and shows up the next morning with coffee anyway. When her name appeared on my screen, I answered without hesitating. Claire, I heard. That is just incredible. Ray always loved you so much, she said. We talked and laughed and remembered him. It felt normal and safe, like exhaling after holding your breath for days. Then, near the end of the call, Megan said, Actually, I have been thinking about opening a small wellness practice. Nothing huge. The rent prices are tough though. I went quiet. How much? Asked Oz. Claire, that is not what I... Megan, how much were you about to ask for? She did not answer. I sat with that silence for a long time after we hung up. It hurt more than anything my family had done. With my family I had half expected it. With Megan I had not seen it coming. I needed time before I could think about it clearly. I took 4 weeks before making any major decisions about the money. I talked to a financial advisor. I met with Mr. Harrison twice. I visited both commercial properties and stood in each empty space, just breathing, thinking about what Grandpa Ray had written. The resource center. He had remembered that conversation. Of course he had. I had sketched the idea on the back of a takeout menu during a hard week at the shelter. A single space where women in crisis could access everything they needed under one roof. Job training, counseling, legal aid, emergency childcare. Everything together. So a mother trying to rebuild her life would not need 3 buses to 3 offices on 3 separate days. I had set it aside because the funding had always seemed impossibly far. Now it was not. I hired an architect and a non-profit consultant. I incorporated as a charitable foundation and named it the Raymond Whitfield Community Center for Women and Families. Construction took 8 months. I hired staff carefully, people who had worked in community services and understood what was actually needed. The morning we opened, 12 women walked through the door before 9 o'clock. By the end of the first month, we had a wait list. I cried in my car on the way home. Happy tears. The best kind. About 14 months after the will reading, I ran into my mother at the farmer's market on Elm Street. She was standing in front of a table of tomatoes in a coat I did not recognize, looking smaller than I remembered. The pearl necklace was gone, along with whatever effortless confidence it used to rest on. She saw me and went still. We stood about 10 feet apart, people moving around us with canvas bags and strollers. Claire, she said. Mom. You look well, she said carefully. I am, I said. She looked back at the tomatoes. Blake's firm placed him on leave. An ethics complaint. It is ongoing. A pause. Your father's company lost its 3 largest accounts. We had to sell the house. I know, I said. I had heard through separate channels. She looked up at me again. Her eyes were different. Tired in a way they had not been before. Not the tired of a long day, but the tired of a long reckoning. I am sorry, she said quietly. Not because of the money. Because of all of it. Because of how long it went on. I studied her face for a long moment, looking for the truth underneath the words. Then I decided what to say. I took a slow breath and chose my words carefully. Mom, I believe you mean that right now. You do. And I am not angry anymore. I let that go a while back for my own sake. She nodded, pressing her lips together. But sorry is not a key, I said. It is a first step on a longer road. That road looks like different choices. It looks like calling when nothing is on fire. It looks like asking about the women at the center the way Grandpa Ray used to ask about my clients. Like being curious about my life instead of embarrassed by it. She swallowed. I do not know how to do that yet. I know, I said. Saying that honestly is somewhere to start. We did not hug. We did not make plans. But we stood there a little longer before she nodded and walked away through the stalls. I did not feel the old familiar weight drop back onto my shoulders the way it used to. I walked to my car. The same Subaru. Still ran perfectly fine. The Raymond Whitfield Community Center had helped over 200 families by then. My name did not appear anywhere on the building. His did. I thought about him every single day. And every single day I made him proud. If this story resonated with you, I'd be grateful if you'd subscribe to this channel for more true stories like this one. Leave a comment below, telling me what you would have done in my situation. I read every single one. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it. Your share might save someone's life. Thank you for staying with me until the very end. I know this wasn't an easy story to hear, and I want to be honest with you, some of the stories that follow contain fictionalized elements created for educational purposes. If that's not something you're comfortable with, Feel free to explore other content that suits you better. But if you're willing to learn from real experiences, even painful ones, I'll be here sharing what I've learned. God bless you. And remember, protecting what is yours is never an option.